Hello, and welcome to Movies We Dig, the podcast about film, antiquity, and everything in between. I'm Christy Vogler.
I'm Colin McCormick.
And I'm Elijah Fleming.
And today, we're talking about Domina, a 2021 British-Italian historical drama television series created by Simon Burke and starring Kasia Smutnik as Livia, the First Lady of Rome. Also joining us today is a very special guest, Dr. Christina Hotalen, who has some really cool hobbies, has a very amazing dissertation webpage about embodying the empire, and we're really excited to talk to her about the show today, which is awesome. So welcome.
Yay, thank you for having me.
Yeah. So I think this is the first time all of us have watched this show, really. I think Lige is the earliest, but it only came out in 2021. So this is fresh for most of us. So starting with our lovely guest, do you dig Domina? And why or why not?
Yeah, I actually really dug it. I thought it was really entertaining. I appreciate how closely they kept with the actual history for the most part. And I like a lot of like the costuming and the sets. I thought they were really good. I kind of thought of it as like what could be a good not necessarily a continuation of HBO's Rome, but a good place where HBO's Rome left off and just straight up omitted. Mm-hmm. I also appreciate the fact that we finally have a show about Rome from the perspective of women, and where women are playing such a huge central, they're driving the plot of the show essentially. Mm-hmm. And I can actually appreciate that, where they're not just, sexy and being
and poisoning and
right.
Showing childbirth as how truly horrifying it actually is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, how about you, Lige? You're the one who kind of turned us on to this show. How did you come to it? And I know you dig it, so
I know I dig it. So I do really dig Domina. I think it does a really great job. And Christina, like you said, I really love to see this part of history from the woman's a very much a woman focus. Not even just Livia, but Scribonia, Julia, Octavia. There's so many women focused perspectives. I feel like I watched this in 2021 when it first came out, in kind of a semi-quarantine pandemic-esque way, where I saw it advertised on some streaming thing that was on my TV, and I was like, yes, that's what I need. That will make me feel better about the world. And I really enjoyed it, and I feel like I've put it on our list for once we get there, once we start doing TV, we should definitely talk about Domina, because I feel like I have a lot to say, and I feel like it has a lot to say. And especially after watching Rome, I, Claudius, and Domina back to back, it has been really, really fun to just see the different takes that they have on the same characters, on the same historical chunks of text that we have. And so I definitely dig Domina, and I'm really glad that we get to talk about it.
Yeah, it's I was just going to add, I'm so glad with the order that we chose to watch all of these in, because yes. It, at least going into Domina, I kind of remembered who everyone was from I, Claudius, so that helped a bit. All right, how about you, Colin? You're the odd man out today.
Yeah, pun intended. But yeah. I hate to do this, but I'm a little mid on this one, where I dig this one, I think, the least out of all of us. And largely because, well, for two reasons. I'm watching this in the context of having just seen Rome and I, Claudius, and I'm thinking about all these shows, and I can't help but always, this is just sort of how I am, but I can't help but read these things sort of against each other. And there's certain things about this show that I liked it a lot more towards the end. I think the first 3 or so episodes for me were a bit rocky, and then by the end I was more on board. But there was a couple of things that I think it gets a little. My main thesis, I think if I were to change one thing about this show, particularly in relationship, comparing it to I, Claudius and Rome, is that this show, I wish, did not take itself quite so seriously and had a little bit more humor to it. Because I think
Yes.
one of the things that made Rome and I, Claudius pop so well is they had jokes and senses of humor and an approach. And there is not a joke to be seen for.
You mean all the shots of them on the Roman toilet you didn't find funny?
I'm glad you noticed that, because I also have a note about that. There are more mid-pee conversations in this show than I have been able to recall.
Right?
Lots of just people squatting and peeing, and then somebody comes into the bathroom and it's like, we have to talk. And then they stand up, and you know what I'm going to say? The thing that drives me most in movies and television is when people go to the bathroom and do not wash their hands.
Hey, they used a sponge on a stick. They're fine.
Wipe. Somebody
That's
at
not
least
on their
wiped.
hands, Christy.
Yeah, because we know Livius's house has running water. They got hooked up to the aqueduct last year.
Liam Cunningham is in all of these. Like
my take was it's like watching a man walk in to collect a paycheck. That's kind of what he's doing in this show. Where he strolls in one scene, he's like, I will read my lines. And then he leaves, he walks off set and gets on the phone with whoever's redecorating his house. That's basically what's going down.
Sure.
But what about you, Christy?
I do. I dig this a lot. For me, a lot of it was, I really like Antigone and looking again at, because like, you know, my whole thing with medicine and the ancient world and women's role in it, like she's a really cool character. All of the childbirth scenes is like, oh, I haven't seen that many childbirth scenes since the Game of Thrones prequel,
which House of Dragons,
which is like, I appreciated, but they also weren't accurate in a lot of the depictions of medieval style childbirth. So I thought this was really interesting.
I want to put a pin in that. I have another opinion on that. So it's
okay. Oh, trust me, we'll be coming and talking about the medicine.
Right, cool.
I agree with what Colin said too, though, is like, had I not just watched Rome and I, Claudius, I would have felt kind of lost in those first few episodes, because it was interesting. I had some conversations on Blue Sky about this. Like, it definitely seemed like, you know, you had large chunks of time where they're like, oh, we don't need to tell the story right here. And I think a lot of that is because it's like, I feel like the show is really reluctant to retrod where, especially Rome had been.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And like the fact that it's like, you know what, we'll do Livia again. Attia, she's dead. Attia gets to be Rome.
Yeah, Attia is conspicuously absent in this show.
Yeah.
I mean, you do kind of feel the whole, like, the ghost of Rome, in part because they're filming at Cinecittà on what I imagine are at least partially repurposed sets from Rome.
Right.
It looks, particularly the exterior shots, look very similar. I want to talk about the interiors, but Christina mentioned them because I did really like the interior decorating in this show. But that's not that we can come back to that later. Sorry.
Yeah.
No,
So
we should do our like too long didn't
watch. Yeah.
Because I have mine.
Okay, Laj, you want to hit us with yours first?
Yeah, it's because your wife is the smartest man in Rome. And everyone knows it. But you can't divorce her. That's
and the prettiest.
And the prettiest.
I loved that line so much.
Okay. I think that sums it up. It's like, yeah, that's what Livia's doing. She obviously has this space. Fantastic.
Yep.
10 out of 10, no notes.
I do have a note. Mine is Livia vows to save the Republic while also making her husband a god. She missed the seminar on making smart goals.
This is kind of getting into my biggest issue, I think, with the revisionism that's happening. But God, what would mine be? Sorry, hang on. I thought I had something pithy, but I just lost it.
I'm gonna say, Christina, do you think you could sum up Domina in a too long didn't read?
Oh gosh. I mean, certainly Livia is the mover and shaker in Rome. She's calling all the shots, which it kind of falls in line, I guess, with what the primary sources were like accusing her of doing. But it's also like, you know, I don't know, like it's sort of like it makes Octavian, or I guess Gaius, as they kept referring to him.
Yeah, that was weird.
Yeah, that kept annoying.
That annoyed me also.
Yeah, like it definitely made him seem like very, I don't want to say dumb, but like that he couldn't, like, I took a little bit of issue with that, like, you know.
Well, and I think that, well, unless Colin, do you have your...
I was going to say, I can can do the actual recap. I don't know if I have a good pithy...
Okay, do the actual recap.
I keep trying to make it about peeing, but I got nothing. I'd be like, important conversations on the toilet. I don't know.
You know what? That does seem to happen. And turtles.
The future. Oh my, terrapins.
Oh, the
You mean terrapins?
Yeah, the terrapin. Nobody ever used. It's like Walking Dead. We can't call them zombies. We have to call them terrapins. But I can do a sort of general recap.
Yeah, give us a general recap, and then I've got a question for Christina.
Yeah, so the kind of arc of season 1, and then we should add that part of the timeliness is this show just debuted season 2. Well, not just, a couple months ago, season 2 came out. But the arc of season 1 is we follow the life of Livia from sort of her youth and marriage to Augustus, and then jumping ahead a little bit into after Augustus has become the sort of first citizen of Rome, up into basically the murder of Marcellus, who was originally slated to be Augustus's sort of favored heir, but who died suddenly under maybe suspicious circumstances. And that is basically the kind of arc of the show, right? Where so Livia and her politicking sort of behind the scenes, beginning with her meet cute, we'll call it, with Gaius,
at her wedding to someone else.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, up into the death of Marcellus, and a
The
possible
aftermath.
accusation. Yeah, and the aftermath therein.
Yeah. So that's a really good summary. And I was just, it's like, this is one of those shows where, like, even before you get into the show itself, you have an amazing opening credits scene with like the music and everything. And I wanted to ask you, Christine, did that speak to you in some way watching that open credits scene?
Yeah, like it definitely set the tone of the show for me, at least, like with the dramatic music. Like I'm replaying it right now in my mind, at least. And like it's definitely, yeah, like it definitely sets the tone of the show as far as like, you know, that there are going to be no jokes, lots of toilet conversations, of course. You know, the most important conversations take place on the can. But yeah, like I thought the opening credits were cool. It would have been nice to like see a little bit more of like, you know, the grittiness of Rome, like HBO's Rome did. Like I really like how they incorporated a lot of things into it, like the mosaics and like the graffiti. This one was very much setting the tone. Yeah,
I would say it's very unsubtle, because you have the statue of Augustus and then flash, and then immediately behind it is the much, much, much bigger statue of Livia, kind of arms out, puppeteering as intense strings sort of play over the back.
Yeah. For me, it was interesting because it is, again, this idea of, you know, it's the epitome of Rome as we tend to think about it in modern imagination, of very whitewashed. We don't get to see the gritty stuff. And I think that's something about this show where, again, Claudius was like this, and Rome was very different, and that Rome was trying really hard to show the different classes as they coexisted with each other. And this one, again, is mostly just focused on the household of the Julio Claudians. So you don't really get that look. You don't get to see the dirty side of Rome in that extent.
I think that's like really what I miss from Rome. I feel like that is a really big absence. We have the upper classes were in their, you know, their atria and like moving around in their, you know, fancy clothes, and they all have their different hair done and all of these things. And I feel like we don't have like the Varenus and Polo that we had in Rome. We don't have like the comic aspect to them, like Colin has said, but also we don't just have that perspective of the everyday person. And maybe they're trying to sort of hint at that. They do have some slave characters that come in and out, but they're not central. They're not like a main character. And I will say that's probably a big absence.
I would say, even just to push it farther, maybe this is the conceit of the show, is because the show is by design so centrally focused on Livia. Like, she is the main character. It's her show, right? Whereas Rome, especially, and then Claudius even too, is more of an ensemble cast. So it's more of like, with Rome, it's all about kind of how all these different threads and plot lines kind of come together and intersect in all these different ways. We're following these different strands. But with Livia, it kind of, everything comes back to Livia always. Like, the whole show is sort of centered on her. Like, you know, figuratively, like the camera's centered on her, and then we look around and we only see everybody else only matters insofar as they come into or out of her life.
Yeah. Because it's like, in terms of internal settings that we mentioned, it's like, it's always a wealthy person's place or a whorehouse.
Right.
One or the other.
Which is
where
funny,
your son
because,
Tiberius
like,
is committing all sorts of crimes.
Well, everyone just hates Tiberius on the show. Like, everyone's so mean to him. I was like, wow, this is like too much almost. Like, you know, killing his little terrapin and then just his overall treatment as like the black sheep of the family. But to get back to the point about like the interior spaces and everything, like I made the joke, you know, when I was watching it, like, oh man, this looks like gangster's paradise on the inside, you know, where they live. Whereas, you know, as I recall, like they lived fairly modestly. And, you know, Livia was always described as, you know, making her own clothes, making Augustus's clothes, and always at the weave. And in the first few episodes of the season, you know, she's sitting at the weave and she's like, I hate this. And, you know, and like she can't be bothered with it. And you never see her do it again. That's a little bit of a tangent. But yeah, it's just interesting the way they took Livia, the direction of Livia in this show is interesting.
Yeah. So, yeah, no, I do that. But one, like you kind of stirred my brain. But in terms of like, speaking of like one of Augustus's and Livia's, at least as they are recounted in like Tacitus and Suetonius and stuff, is they're very modest. They kind of like, oh, we're just like everyone else. We're just private citizens. And one of the things I did like about the show is I think it's in episode 4 where it's when Octavian is nominated to be Augustus, right? Because they're having this whole debate about, you know, the Senate's going to ask me to give up my powers. And how do I do that? And Agrippa is like, let's take the powers. We'll like be dictator. And Livia is trying to figure out how, and then Livia is one, they basically come up with the idea. And what I really liked that the show got is how Augustus kind of pulled the trick that Julius Caesar and other people before him couldn't pull, which was the Senate has to ask for it. Right. And like the way to become the way to become dictator is not by taking power, because then eventually someone will just stab you. The way to become dictator is to make everybody happy. And then when everybody is happy, then they want you to keep being dictator because you make them rich or not having to go to war, or you absolve them of debts or whatever it is. Like that's how he did it, right? He made everybody want it.
Well, in my sense, it's like not even necessarily making everyone happy, but like making everyone recognize how much work was needed to achieve that peace after years of civil wars. I'm like, but if you want to take over, I mean, go ahead. And they're like, wait a minute. I don't think we want to do that. No, you keep doing what you're doing. It's good. And I think that's more realistic, right? Humans are always striving to be lazier or to push the work onto someone else.
100%.
That's Tacitus's whole kind of pitch is like the way it happened was everybody was just so tired of war. They were willing to accept whatever, so long as it meant not war. Yeah. Right? So, you know, we've had 100 years on and off of civil war, and like, I will settle for dictatorship if that's what it means to end it.
Well, okay. On this note, maybe we should just like talk about this characterization of Augustus in general, because we do have a time jump. Like, so the first, is it 3 or 2 episodes?
I think it's 3. Episode 3 is where we get the new cast.
Okay. So they do have a time jump, and I feel like they actually do it decently well. As far as like the first 2 episodes are these like twerpy teenage dipshits, for lack of a better term.
I wrote that in my notes. Octavian's a real boy.
Like,
he is, and he looks like a little emo boy. I just kept getting like Gerard. What's his name? Yeah, that guy. And it kept irritated the hell out of me, quite frankly. Because I'm like, I can't unsee that. You know, I imagine little Octavian and Augustus from HBO's Run with the pretty blonde hair and you know, that steely look. But this guy was like, is that Evan Peters or like Gerard Way? That was my
very different. I think it's a very different characterization of Augustus than we have gotten from, certainly from Rome, where he's very robotic and, you know, maybe manipulative and calculating in so many ways. And he's very much more of like a jock, just like throwing around power. But I also wouldn't call him as charismatic as our Claudius Augustus. And so he's in this weird middle space as both like the younger and the older. So yeah, I kind of like this Augustus because he seems more human in so many ways. Like he feels like he was the guy who was in just like the right place at the right time, and like his play happened to work. And that feels like weirdly realistic.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I love Rome's Octavian. And I don't know how I like can negotiate this characterization of Augustus. I would love to hear your guys' thoughts.
I viewed it as like what I think they did really successfully is convince me of how much Octavian needed Agrippa, needed Livia. Like no person just shows up and be like, give it all to me. It's like there is a support cast there that's really important. And if, I like that later episodes show that if even one of them leaves him, he has lost his strength.
Yeah.
And he's vulnerable as a result of that. And I think that's what made it really realistic. Then these ideas of like the eccentric genius who, he just pulled himself up by bootstraps and
this is
Twitter, whatever.
I have the kind of the reverse as with HBO Rome. With HBO Rome, I prefer young Octavian to adult Octavian. I think he goes too robotronic when he gets to an adult. And then with this, I think I prefer Matthew McNulty as old Gaius to the Tom Glencarny as younger Gaius, where part of the Tom Glencarny is like, why would anyone put up with this kid? Right? Like he just has this like spoiled, indulgent, he's just banging everybody's wives, which according to Suetonius does tell us that he did bang a lot of people's wives, but yeah, it's like you don't I don't buy why this kid's such a political player. But then older Augustus like makes sense to me at a certain level, and part of it might have just even been like the young hair, where he's kind of this young.
I know, why does he have long hair? Why does it have to be that way?
He's this young kind of floppy hippie or something.
So he's a teen and he's angsty.
Yeah, because that's another element where I think like the young cast are in real life older than they're I think all in their like mid to late 20s playing teenagers, and then the older cast are all like in their mid 40s playing like 30-year-olds, I think, because I checked back because like after Actium I think Octavian and Livia are in their like late 20s early 30s or something like that. I forget the exact ages, but
that sounds right. Yeah.
Octavian, I think he was born in 63, and so he's like in his 30s. Although it makes sense because we have to probably go with him for a couple more years. So those actors would be a little older than they're portraying. But
and then there's sex scenes too, and it's like you can't really show teenagers on a show sleeping with each other. Well, how about you, Christina? What do you think of this Augustus, this Gaius?
Yeah, Gaius Julius Caesar. They never call him Octavian, right?
No, they never call him Octavian.
Which was a choice.
Yeah, that was interesting. As far as I can remember, at least, like I think in HBO's Rome, he was referred to as like Caesar, or I'm sorry, Octavian mostly, and then Augustus later. But they always referred to him as Gaius, which definitely threw me for a loop. But yeah, I would have to agree that I like older Gaius on this show more than younger Gaius. Like I prefer the Octavian in HBO's Rome because he was always like, not that Gaius on Domina was like dumb by any means, but I felt like HBO's Octavian really captured the essence of who Octavian was as a person, just really smart, witty, and just kind of kept to himself, was more kind of like a nerd, for lack of a better word. Whereas this Gaius was, very much like a jockey teenager. But I do appreciate the older Gaius in this show. And I think it was Colin who said it, but like, these supporting characters on this show, it demonstrates how important they are to Gaius.
Christy.
I'm sorry.
It's all right.
All good.
Sorry.
That would be very on brand for this show if I took credit for Christy's contribution.
I'm sorry. I'm
being Domina.
I'm mad of it. But yeah, I mean, it just goes to show just how important these people were to Octavian or Augustus's rise to power within, the early empire. I certainly liked his interactions with Agrippa. I'm glad we got a lot of Agrippa on this show. I thought Agrippa was really great.
Ben Bat. Also, very chiseled. It's a very chiseled Agrippa.
Yes.
Running buck naked into the sea to celebrate the death of Marcellus.
One of my favorite scenes is Livia just like straight face reading, "I'm so sorry that Marcellus is dead." Just Agrippa like cheering and running joyfully into the ocean. Okay.
Him beating up other dudes in like the little fighting ring.
My MVP, who sadly disappeared halfway through the show, is Maximus, who was my favorite. He just seemed like you should give me more Maximus. This guy gets it.
I so agree.
He knew what was up too. He was
really
like, dude, you can't leave Livia. It's the smartest man in Rome.
Smartest man in Rome. Your wife is the smartest man in Rome.
And he just disappears halfway through the show. And he was off discovering Horace or whoever.
I guess.
Oh man.
The one thing I wish we got more of was Mark Antony. I wish we got a little bit more Mark Antony on this show. But I do like the portrayal of Mark Antony on HBO's Rome. I feel like that's kind of hard to follow up. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. But.
No.
It does feel like one of those like, ooh, they did Mark Antony really good in Rome. I don't know if
let's
we
not touch it.
Yeah.
improve upon that.
That may have been a good choice on
Domina's because the show makes an odd choice about the sort of pacing and setting, because we pick up kind of the first 2 or so episodes are like during the Civil Wars, but that all happens again because of like the show is so centrally fixed on Livia. We see we see almost none of the actual Civil War. That all just kind of breezes past us. We get a little bit of, so we really don't see Augustus's rise to power that happened. He's pretty firmly entrenched by season 3 or 4. And it's just sort of mentioned. And so it struck me as an odd choice that we kind of like split it both ways. Like it's not a story about their ascension, but it's also, it doesn't start, like it feels like it either should have started with them already being in power or like after their marriage, or I don't know, before. It split a weird difference to me.
I actually really like and I feel like it's like a very woman focused perspective on what is Livia doing during the Civil War. And it is like crawling
Sextus
through
Pompey.
the dirt. Also that. Thank you, Colin.
No problem.
But it's like crawling through the dirt in the forest as they're like trying to escape another purge in another city, right? So I feel like it was very focused on, I guess, a civilian point of view, but also like an important civilian point of view.
Yeah.
Like she, because of her marriage, is very targeted and has a child in tow. So she's like dragging this toddler through the woods as they're trying to escape like butchering in various cities. And that felt very real and something that I don't think we've seen in any other version of an ancient miniseries or an ancient TV series. I actually kind of liked it. And it also, I feel like, set the stage a lot for later Tiberius, who, we do like say is weird and standoffish and strange, but they say in so many ways, it's like, this kid was like dragged through the woods. He saw shit that like no child should ever see. Like he is a child of civil war. And that has really shaped him. Like obviously as an adult.
Which is something we complained about with I Claudius, right? Like all of a sudden, like, Tiberius, he wasn't great, but then all of a sudden he's supposedly doing horrendous things and you don't know where it came from. This really establishes like he's seen some things.
Seen some shit.
Yeah. And
explains a lot.
And like it does, it impacts him greatly. And it impacted Livia too, to be like, kind of heartless in a lot of regards because she had to do so much to survive. And so they both went through that trauma together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I can see how that's not like an exciting part of a story to tell. Like there is like a dip that I feel like, but I like that they kept it in for the characterization. And I feel like it worked for me as like a woman watching this story.
We can talk about Tiberius more later, but Tiberius, since we were talking about Augustus, he feels very much like young Augustus or young Octavian in Rome. Like they really just kind of shifted the character over and now he's the calculating odd one out who's going to eventually rise to power. Though he also, like we just mentioned, has this macabre side to him. But I guess we should talk about the main thrust, which is Livia and her.
We probably should. We really should talk about her.
Yeah, we're 30 minutes in. I guess we can talk about the show.
I really love young Livia. I really like older Livia. I think both of the actresses did a really great job. I almost wish that we had more young Livia.
Yeah.
Because I feel like I do almost wish that they did the time jump like a little bit later. Or I feel like those actors, because they are older, could have played older, like, and kept kind of pushing that until, I don't know. But I feel like that's also like a really hard line to sort of balance on. But I liked young Olivia a lot, and I think a lot of that worked really, really well. And I don't know how I feel about her being like a secret Republican. And I feel like this is like the big thing that we see in so many modern renditions of ancient Rome. It's like, if thinking about Gladiator, it's like we're coding our like good characters with, do they want a return to the Republic? Yes or no? And like in I, Claudius, it was the same thing. It's like we're killing off these quote unquote like good characters because they want to bring the Republic back. And we're on Livia's side, supposedly, or I feel like we should be, because she's secretly plotting against Augustus, question mark, to bring the Republic back, question mark. So yeah, I feel like that is the biggest through line that I can see in this drawn out connection between a lot of our different renditions of ancient Rome in TV, is how we use the Republic.
Someone else should talk, because
Okay, I got it. Okay,
I'm sorry, I went very far on that.
No.
This brings us back to Liam Cunningham as is it Livius, the
yes,
father,
yeah,
and his death at Philippi, but a very honorable Roman man, and all of this. And I liked that it was a big departure from I, Claudius, because I do think that sometimes the show is reacting to that one as well. Like, Rome is definitely very present in their mind when they're making this, but I think they are connecting back to I, Claudius, and like that's just it, right? That's the major difference between the Livia, is like Livia and I, Claudius is like, gotta get rid of all the Republicans because they don't realize the system was broken, and I don't want to go back to that. Versus this Livia is, I mean, that is the historical fact, right? Her father fights at Philippi and dies.
Yep.
And so he was on the other side of things. So how does Livia end up married to Augustus? And, how does she deal? What I really loved was the relationship it showed between father and daughter. Because I think sometimes we forget when we're trying to talk, like bring women voices into these ancient paternalistic societies. It's like sometimes we forget, like, there were loving relationships between men and women. And that's the other thing I like about the show, is like Augustus and Livia love each other. Livia was loved by her father, and that would complicate the situation for sure. But I think where they're trying to get around that problem is, like, someone had said it. I was trying to think if it was the fever dream of her father. It's like, you've fallen in love with power. And like, I think that's a really important question, because yeah, she might have had certain motivations early on in the marriage, but over time, her position connected to Augustus gave her tons of power and privilege that would be very difficult to let go.
Yeah, I like the relationship between Livia and her father. I appreciate the fact that he kept calling her Little Bear. I thought that was a really cute little reference. That it's nice. You don't always see those types of like tender relationships between father and daughter on these shows. At least I haven't seen like Claudius. I've only seen like maybe an episode of it, so I can't speak to that show. But it's a nice change to see a loving relationship between father and daughter, But I thought it was interesting. I like the fact that the show started with Livia as a teenager, and her marriage to Tiberius Claudius Nero. I think that's his name.
Yeah, sounds right.
Yeah. I like that it showed that her marriage to Tiberius Claudius Nero, and her sort of upstart. But I think she definitely knew that by being with Octavian, that she recognized how powerful he was, and that by marrying into that, she would have access to that power. When the first thing she asked him is for armed bodyguards and for all these things, and he's like, what do you need all that for?
Yes.
She's like, don't worry about it. But I also appreciate the fact that when they finally agree to be married to each other, that she is fully pregnant, because that is important to keep that little detail in there, that he willingly wanted to, he was going to marry her, whether she was 9 months pregnant or not, like that didn't matter to her. And he was willing to find any way to make that marriage happen, despite him being with Sempronia, who was, also expecting his child as well at the time. And so I appreciate the fact that like it kept those details in the show. I like that they didn't cut that out, because they could have easily cut some of that out.
And I think it's important and informative, because it does. I mean, one of the kind of questions when, it supposedly, right, Augustus did divorce his wife Scribonia the day she gave birth in order to marry a very pregnant Livia. And then him and Livia remained married for the rest of their lives for a very long time, despite not actually having any children together, which does kind of invite this question. Was like, well, why would they have done that? And the sort of only natural explanation is, he loved her and or needed her in some capacity. But to kind of Eli's point about like, right, when we want to have good characters in a Roman setting, we make them Republicanists or Republic sympathizers. And this is where my biggest kind of like the hurdle that I can't get over with this show is that because it starts from the premise of like, we are going to revision and resuscitate and revitalize Livia, right? It's, in the long tradition of, we're going to tell the story from the villain's perspective, right? Going back to like Wicked, or, before that, right? I mean, this is not a new thing, right? Maleficent. And this has been increasingly, I think, a popular move. Sure. And so there are some changes that can happen that are fine, right? Where like her first husband, Nero, he sucks, right? So we can get rid of him. Marcellus sucks. We can get rid of him. Like, he's a threat. Like, I'm not.
Marcellus, the boy really, was in a struggle to do it.
Yeah. And yeah, so Marcellus really, I think, if anyone is really torn down, it's him. His reputation in this show really just whoosh. But then it comes into like, well, if we're going to make her good, quote unquote, right, then she should want to restore the Republic. But then you run into the bumper lanes of, well, she is the mother and grandmother of all of the next emperors. So, right. So she failed spectacularly to restore the Republic, or that was never her intent. So we'll see where this show is going with this. Is it going to pull it? Because Claudius did almost the exact same thing, where Claudius has this, this plan at the end to sort of restore the Republic that falls out on him. We'll see if the kind of same thing happens with Livia. I call this problem the Cruella problem, because it's like, when it starts from the impulse of we want to turn the bad character good, then you still have to reconcile, well, like, what if they kill puppies or something like that?
Yeah, no, exactly.
Yeah.
And then how do we reconcile? And then the show kind of contorts itself in a way. So we'll see how hard the show has to contort itself too.
I will say that to me, what my overall takeaway was, and what I think this show does really well that you don't always see in other shows, is that it shows just how powerful Livia is, but how quickly she can lose that power. Like, there are decisions that are a gamble. And if it's a matter of luck, if she gets, like, I love that her entire family, like all the younger kids are like, don't mess with Aunt Livia. Like, and, Agrippa's like, obviously I know who killed Marcellus. Like, it's like she has this level of infamy within her family, but then we get to see what a knife's edge that is for her all the time, and just how close she is to kind of losing it all. And I really appreciate that. Like, she is powerful, but her power has, like, I don't want to say limits, it's contingent on a lot of things, which makes her vulnerable. And I think the show did that really well.
I think it's Scribonia who says at some point, she's like, if we know, imagine who else knows. What if Livia knows? And it's like, she's like already 5 steps behind, and like Livia's already like dealing with it. I just love that.
Sidebar. I love when it was Marcelina all of a sudden was the one putting it all together.
No.
So that the whole conflict in the final episode is basically like everybody kind of knows or suspects that Livia has killed Marcellus, and then it just basically boils down to like Augustus doesn't care. He's like, I'm fine. Like, right. Fine, we'll let it go. And that leads us into like, so really even just how centered this show is on women one, in that there's so many female characters, two, that is told from the perspective. There's such an emphasis on like childbirth and child rearing, but then also that leads to all of our villains are basically other women. Where like the main antagonist is Scribonia, who becomes the Servilia of this show. Right, she's doing almost the same thing.
Constant curses.
Yeah, cursing, trying to curse, and in the same juxtaposition where like the Servilia Adia, where Servilia is proper, refined, a true patrician noblewoman, behaves properly, follows all the rules, going up against Adia, this kind of unscrupulous, willing to do whatever it takes. You know, you have that same dynamic here with Scribonia and Livia. Although the thing that I kind of almost prefer is like, well, Adia is, we don't need to find a way to make Adia a saint. She just gets to be wicked, and we kind of love her for it. And I kind of almost wish that the show went this way with Livia. That's just like, just let her be bad. That's kind of fun. Like, right? Let her just be kind of wicked, and we can revel in that a little bit.
I almost would have been a little more impressed had Livia like done the deeds instead of just making Antigone do all the dirty work for her.
Yes.
You know, because like if it wasn't for Antigone and Tycho, like there's no way Livia would have been able to eliminate all those, you know, competitors to the throne, essentially, or the heirs, I should say.
I'm wondering if they're gonna, because I don't think Antigone shows up in season 2.
No.
Okay.
Oh, really?
So I feel like there's gonna be
spoiler.
a shift.
I'm sorry.
So yeah, that's one
Just
thing
'cause
interesting
I've read
thing.
the cast list. I'm sorry.
Was there a?
Yeah.
I wonder if there's a cat. If there was, this is a behind the scenes issue or something. But
I don't know.
It could be, but it could also be an explanation as like, you know, no one starts out as the villain. So in like I, Claudius, it makes it look like Livia just did all of it. And like here's like, oh, her first husband died of some oysters, and she wasn't aware of like what had actually caused it for a long time. And then she learns, and she's like, oh, I can make this an option for this. Like Marcellus cannot. I cannot have him. So, and that's just it, right? It's almost a huge it is a royal screw up of a poisoning that happens with Marcellus, and Livia gets poisoned. And so like, it doesn't go well, but the end result,
it kind of works out perfectly.
Kind of. I mean, she kind of covers her own tracks, right? Like, why would I poison myself?
Yeah.
The only real screw up was Tycho should have not buried that guy in the sand 6 inches down.
Shouldn't have buried him with his stuff. Like just
also that.
Stuff.
Yeah.
This is just a body in the sand. Who knows?
With the ring, the identifying ring still
And with
on
his
it.
like his little wax tablet of like, come on, man, come on. Easy enough to take that out of his hands. I don't know.
Tycho, do better.
He was rushed.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Digging in sand.
And also, like moving a dead body by yourself, terrible.
We should come back to this when we wrap up the show.
Yeah.
We should.
This will be our closing question.
I mean, Elijah and I have a lot of experience digging very deep into the ground.
And I have a lot of experience moving dead bodies. So unfortunately, that is true.
Yeah, no, I just realized it's like, they're lighter than usual. I'm like, never mind, you've had another career.
No.
Oh, no. Okay, I got dark. Let's just say we're informed on what this
I was
requires.
going to say, like, if someone was tuning into this podcast at the right or wrong time, depending on how you want to frame it, like...
We're archaeologists, and Elijah used to be
examiners.
And yep.
And I was an ME.
Yep.
That's awesome.
Oh my gosh.
Wait, no, I feel like we should talk about Antigone like as a whole, because I do think it's interesting that they framed like Livia as, through the whole first few episodes, she was very much like, don't murder people, that's un-Roman, because like Livius like, you know, was like, nope, we're not gonna kill Caesar, he was not a part of the assassination plot. And she like had that, I don't know,
we don't play dirty. It's un-Roman.
We don't play dirty. Yeah, that was like part of her upbringing, that she didn't think that was how you played politics. And that is not like the landscape of politics in Rome anymore. And I don't know how I feel about Antigone being the one to kind of rope her into that, because I really love Antigone as a character. She's this like former slave who has all of this knowledge. And I love that she says at one point, she's like, my mother was born in Rome. Her mother was born in Rome. Like I'm Roman. Like this is where I come from. even if she's a freed woman, even if her ancestors were slaves, like this is what she thinks of as her home. And how realistic that must have been for so many slaves and freed people. And like, are we like pinning the bad or the evilness like on her for like corrupting Livia?
It feels like a way to kind of exonerate Livia a little bit.
Yeah, it does. And I don't know how I feel about that. And I almost kind of like Antigone not being there in the future to maybe be the devil on Livia's shoulder, because do we need that? Do we I don't know.
Well, and this speaks to a kind of issue I love Antigone as well. And you know, in some ways this is a show that was trying to be diverse in some of its representations of the Roman world, but I feel like it trips on quite a few things. Antigone being a Black actress is one of them, because it's that story, right? Of a slave who's been enslaved for her family's been enslaved for a long time. She is then freed. She is then recaptured and put back into slavery. And then, yeah, she's the one who initiates these poisonings that we usually accredit to Livia and like mark her as evil for that. So like, it's not a fair representation. Especially, I like the idea that possibly her skills with herbs and medicine is coming from knowledge of her family and from Africa. I think that's really cool. But more realistically, in a lot of regards, is like most people in Rome who are going to listen to women who do medicine are probably of Greek descent. And you have plenty of Greek slaves like that. So it's like it was an active choice to make Antigone Black and have her fulfill the slave role in that regard. So it's like I have a little bit of problem. I would love to know how other people have taken that, people of color, like how they kind of take that character in that storyline, because I feel like it could have been done a little differently. I'll leave it at there because I have another gripe with diversity. But
this is kind of the problem sometimes, right? Is like one of the marks of like privilege is you only have to represent yourself. And to be fair, I'm quoting Linda Holmes from NPR on this one. She says this, but like you end up in this situation where you have only a handful of characters of color, and then they end up sort of taking on the world of everything else that they represent outside of themselves and that character. And so it is, part of me kind of worries like it sucks. Like I don't have a good solution. It is unfair.
Yeah.
All of this stuff kind of gets dragged in where we don't have the same kind of things about the Spanish slave, for example.
Yes. Right.
Although he's problematic for a different reason. So.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there a like, not bury your gays, but like there's a little like Marcellus being gay and queer and also villainized. Like, I don't know. I don't want to take those two too closely construed, but.
And also your most trans representing actor in the show, the mother of the whorehouse that Antigone was sold to, and then is killed by Antigone. It's not good. It's not a good look, Domina.
Puritanical in its.
Yeah. And it's like, this is not messaging well. If you're really paying attention in 2023, it's like, this is not a good look. Yeah, there's no, like, at least for a while in Rome, you had Octavia and Servilia for a period of time. And the relationship didn't end well, but it wasn't the worst thing.
It wasn't the best thing.
It wasn't the best, but it wasn't the worst. Like most relationships. So, you know.
Fair enough.
I lost the thread. Sorry.
Okay. I would say, Christina, what are your thoughts on Antigone? Do you have strong feelings one way or the other?
Yeah, I feel basically the same way that Christy does, where it's like, I like Antigone as a person, but I do have to agree that, that I thought it was a choice to make, the Black slave be the one instigating all these murders and kind of fuel Livia's bloodlust, essentially. Did I think it was satisfying when she killed Tiberius Claudius Nero? Sure, because he was a jerk.
He deserved it, right? 100%.
Yeah, I mean, did I think it was satisfying that she got back at the, mistress of the slave house? Sure, I thought that was satisfying, but it definitely it rubbed me the wrong way too. And like just the fact that like all the slaves in this show, like they were all darker. And listen, I get it. It's the Roman Empire, so it is what it is. But it's also like, there were Greeks too, and they're not. As a
they
half
did have
Greek,
the one German girl. They had the one German girl,
right? And they made her into a whore essentially,
Yeah.
or at least Livia attempted to sell her off as one. Yeah, it was like, I don't know. I think like even Spartacus did a little better job with handling the slaves than the show did in some ways. You know, I mean, at least the slaves in Spartacus, they had like their own personalities. They had like really meaningful relationships with each other, and they weren't just all bloodthirsty, despite half of them being gladiators. Like there were. Sorry, Colin. Go ahead.
No. Keep going.
That was mostly
it.
I
was going to say, it seems like the show's kind of thesis, if I can maybe try to mind read for it, is that like Antigone is informed by all of her like suffering and trauma, where like she has had it much rougher than Livia for all these reasons. Like one, starting off enslaved, her when she is knocked unconscious by Tiberius and then resold into slavery despite having gotten her freedom. And just like how hard she has to kind of to scrap for everything, which is what like makes her that she's more willing to poison the madam's grapes, or poison who she wants to poison, get what she wants. And even just adding on to, I mean, also that character does suffer. When I think about it now, there's another round of like, we are just inflicting a lot of trauma onto this character.
Yeah.
Where
the miscarriage, right?
And then the miscarriage. Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Right. Everything kind of happens to her. That sort of, is why she's more willing to go to the dark side.
I will say my favorite moment that I think spoke really well to slavery in Rome was when she was freed, and her first thing she asked is like, what's going to happen to me? Because like, oh, I have my freedom, I lose the house I've grown up in, I lose those like that's her fear all of a sudden, right? Mm-hmm. And that's the problem too, is like that becomes kind of the arc of her story, is like, I'm free, but I'm not ever really truly free because my existence is so closely tied to Livia and this household.
Right. I mean, I do appreciate the fact that Livia does have a genuine fondness for Antigone. She does deeply care about her, even before Antigone started to eliminate, Augustus's so-called heirs, or heir apparents, I should say. Mm-hmm. And so that was nice to see, was, a sort of genuine respect for each other in that way, and that Livia really went out of her way to get Antigone out of slavery again and to bring her back into the household. But yeah, you're right. Like, I can understand Antigone's actions, considering she did have a really horrible upbringing, being born a slave and then being abandoned in the woods, knocked unconscious, only to be back in slavery. Like, I can empathize with that.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Yeah.
So interesting that she does not come back for season 2, but I will have to hold off on that until.
So interested.
I said, I think the reason is like they don't want to put that all on Antigone. Like Livia now has to choose. Like, if this is this the route she's going to pursue, and if so, it is up to her. And I do hope we get to that point in I, Claudius, where she's just an old woman talking to another poisoning woman. Be like, oh, what do you use? Because like that was one of my favorite scenes from I, Claudius.
Maybe I'm just biased and the world's been poisoned by I, Claudius, but like I just kind of want to see a wicked Livia and just own it, right? Just be.
I mean, we might get to that point.
We might,
maybe, yeah. We'll see if the how it.
Because I think that's what season 1 was about, was trying to show that villains aren't born, they're made. Tyrants aren't born, they're made. Like all of these things.
I guess we can talk about the supporting cast.
Yeah. So like from Antigone, I kind of wanted to maybe go toward Tiberius and Nero as boys, because Antigone like feels a lot of like maternal attachment to the boys. And I think that's so interesting. And again, is such a realistic like vision of motherhood in the ancient world, as like Livia has to leave her children when she gets a new husband, and like Scribonia has to leave her like newly born child with Livia, who is her husband's new wife. And that was so sad and heartbreaking, and it like pulls on all of these heartstrings in a very, I think, like realistic again way of this is the reality of the political situation that women find themselves in. And it's not surprising that Antigone would have a very strong maternal feelings about Tiberius and Drusus, who she helped raise in so many ways, even if they are little weirdos.
And everybody keeps saying Tiberius is weird. Nobody likes him. And then Tiberius, who also, I will add, looks like Billy Joe Armstrong from Green Day. Like he also has strong emo vibes all the time, but
has only looked more like Billy Joe Armstrong as he has gotten older. I feel like I also looked at his like IMDb page and I was like, wow, okay.
Well, and I think that's correct, because I was going back to what I was thinking earlier about like the trauma that both Tiberius and Livia experienced in killing that soldier who was, going to turn them in.
Yeah.
And like, I don't know if you guys noticed, but Livia had called Tiberius Little Bear. Like she used the nickname her father used for Tiberius, but then we get that time skip, and after this event, I don't think she calls him Little Bear anymore. Like something kind of breaks in their relationship.
She calls both of them. She calls them little bears at some point. It's both Tiberius and Drusus, but it might just be like once or twice, but it's both of them. It's not just Tiberius.
Yeah.
And she really like has this kind of separation from him for a while. Right. And I think it's probably because of that trauma.
Yeah. And the thing they point out is like he reminds people of his father. Tiberius reminds people of his father, and Drusus reminds people of their grandfather.
Yep.
Or really what's going on is Drusus is reminding people of his actual father, Sextus Pompey.
Yep.
Who is a beach bum? I don't know how else to...
He looked like a surfer.
He definitely has like a puka shell necklace.
Just hanging out on Sicily, and I'm like, you know what? I too would just stay on Sicily.
Just hanging out, be like disrupting Rome's grain supply, living the catching waves in the afternoon.
Good for him.
Same, Sextus Pompey, same.
I love that part where Livia just goes absolutely like ape shit on Pompey's altar.
Oh, the altar,
just fucking
good.
Goes wild. And Tiberius is like, what the fuck are you doing? And just loses his mind. And she's like, I'm pregnant. I'm like, yeah, I would probably have the same reaction.
Yeah, sounds about right.
Also, like, something that I appreciate is we've touched on it a few times, but I really appreciated about the show was both how transactional marriage and divorce is. Like, this is a thing. Like, it's a contract, right? It is a contract to benefit two parties, and if it's not beneficial to the two parties anymore, it can be broken off and reestablished with someone else. I think we forget it's like marriage is a contract at the end of the day.
It's very much a business arrangement.
Yeah. And at the same time, children are part of that. Like, I think that's what's so cruel about this world and so realistic is like it truly reduces people down to property.
Right. Reminds me of this quote that I read about Marcus Aurelius. I want to say it's Cassius Dio, but correct me if I'm wrong. But, when Marcus Aurelius is asked about divorcing Faustina because, there are rumors of her, being unfaithful. And he says, well, if I do that, I'd have to return the dowry of the empire. I'm not quoting that correct. I'm not quoting that verbatim, but that's basically the gist of it, is that Faustina is the empire, and it just, when I was watching Domina, I kept thinking of that sort of, that transactional aspect of marriage and childbirth, especially like with Sempronia having to give up baby Julia to Livia. It's like, oof. That's hard. That's really hard. I feel for these women that just had their children to their husband's household. It's like, God, that sucks.
Yeah.
And it explains too of like why pregnancy is terrifying, as we see over and over again. But it's like, even if you survive it, that doesn't mean you even get to see your kid grow up because divorce can just remove them from you.
And the pressure of having the next one, because also one of the main plot points is Livia has the miscarriage and then is unable to have any more children. And then she's basically like, well, that's it. I'm done. Because if I can't give Augustus an heir, then like, what good am I? Which leads us to Marcellus and his obsession with grandchildren. And Augustus's general obsession with heirs and legacy.
Yeah.
Which the thing that he never quite gets.
Yeah. Yep.
Which is weird because it's like he was adopted, right? That was
I did make a note about that. I'm like, he's so fixated, and it seems like a missed opportunity that the show doesn't bring up that his heirdom to Julius Caesar is via adoption.
Yeah.
Which was a very popular thing among Roman patricians, that they would adopt people. And
there's a lot of lead in the pipes in those days. So you got to find a kid where you can.
I guess so.
Damn.
But Tiberius, this angsty little emo teenager. Anything else we want to? Because he's simultaneously very astute at politics, and very apathetic towards them. Whereas brother Drusus is all vim and vigor.
I can definitely see like Tiberius's personality, like you said, like astute, but very much politically savvy. Like I can definitely see how that plays a factor in him being emperor much later.
Yes.
And I think I'd like to think that's what the show is setting up, is for him to eventually take over.
Yeah.
For sure.
I think at some point it's Augustus who points out that he's really good at management or administration.
Yes.
He's really good at administration, but that's not necessarily the same as politics. It's like that's knowing the people in positions and what they're capable of and like what they can do, but that is not the same as like wheeling and dealing people to get things that you want.
Right.
And then and it also kind of gets into Tiberius's alienation from it. Like a lot of this feels like it's looking ahead to Tiberius's reign, where all that Tiberius wants to do when he's in charge is not be emperor and just peace off to Capri or Rhodes or whatever, and just kind of like hang out and push philosophers off cliffs or whatever. And so he has lines of like, why can't we just stay here like in the lake country and just like chill? Like, why do I have to do this?
Why do I have to go back?
Also his alienation from his mother and the rift that's going to form, which, Claudius kind of gets into a little bit of like Tiberius very much resenting Livia for the way she's sort of controlling his life, and his like, he just can't get out. And he's an old man and she's an even older woman. And then, he's just bumping into her in the street. And he's like, will I ever be rid of you?
No.
But, and also we're just missing, the great lines like, God, this is my Claudius, where she says like, I must have been nodding when I gave birth to you or something like that. Or like, the day something occurs to you that it hasn't occurred to me already. Like, I want you to light my funeral pyre, whether or not I'm still alive.
I do like that this Tiberius is kind of like Livia's match in some ways. Like he always seems to be able to track what she's doing. Like he recognizes it all. He can follow it. He like reads between the lines, and Drusus is like, what? And he's like, oh, I thought that was obvious. How like is that play between the two of them? But at the same time, he's not instigating anything. Like he's not running any games of his own. He's just watching everybody else scurry around like rats in a cage, because he doesn't want
plan
to, right?
Is to get Tiberius and Drusus in power so they can restore the Republic. And Drusus has the sort of popularity, or is at least likable, and they need each other, right? They together, Tiberius and Drusus could be one very good person.
Yes.
Yeah.
But they're two brothers.
So what do you guys make of Tiberius's obsession with his mom? And I feel like they kind of tried to resolve that, because we see in the last episode of season 1, we see him interacting with a prostitute wanting him to be the mother, and then he ends up strangling her.
Yeah, he kills her.
It gets very edible. Edible.
But then after that, Antigone reveals she's the one who killed his father, because he seems really obsessed with, like, he believes that Livia killed their father.
Right.
And then, but he learns like this actual maternal figure in his life, Antigone, is the one who did that.
Yeah.
And that's when he decides all of a sudden to be supportive about this, put Drusus in power.
I read it as guilt, but I don't know. That might have been a misreading.
I'm just really curious, like, where that aspect, like, what is his obsession exactly? Like, yeah, why is he paying so much attention to the machinations of his mother?
Or even just like it gets the early hints of like why he kills the turtle.
Oh, that's because it was given to him from Marcellus and he hates Marcellus.
Oh, all right, never mind.
That part felt pretty straightforward.
Comment retracted.
Yeah, I don't fully know where they're going with his obsession. And I don't know if they're just trying to make it another aspect of like the trauma and I don't know, something weirder that they plan to do in season 2, which I don't know. I'm not like, we don't need to make Tiberius weirder than he is. Like,
I guess
no.
I'm curious, what's the like natural endpoint for this show?
Yeah.
Hypothetically, blank check, we got as many seasons as we want. Where does it end with her death? Does it end before her death? Does it end with Tiberius on the throne? Does it end with Caligula on the throne?
I mean, if it ended with her death, I mean, in a perfect world, I would love for the show to eventually go down to like Agrippina the Younger being her granddaughter, because Agrippina is so much like Livia, you know, but I don't like, as far as the question about like where they're taking Tiberius, I mean, Tiberius and Livia have a very complicated relationship. I mean, when she dies, he basically doesn't allow her to be buried in Augustus's mausoleum and doesn't allow her to become deified and receive those honors, at least. And at least having watched ahead, like, it seems like he kind of comes around to Livia. I mean, that's what it seems like. But again, because Tiberius is the way he is, I mean, he could easily just switch too, you know? And I don't know. I don't really have an answer.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if the show is allowed to go as far, I don't know how far season 2 goes, but if it's allowed to continue, are we going to get a Sejanus, right? Who's in kind of a way, it's like the wedge between Tiberius and Livia.
Yeah. I mean, and that's kind of the funny thing to think about, right? Like Livia's vow and grand plan is now based upon the death of her husband. Like she's just waiting for Augustus to die.
I mean, or is she going to poison his figs? We'll see.
Yeah. And like, that'd be interesting. It's like, so I could see the end being something like Augustus, but again, it's like Livia seems so powerful, but in the end, she can't get, if that's supposedly the goal, she can't get Tiberius to reinstate the Republic.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what does that do to her? Like that for her, Tiberius is the last opportunity.
It's true.
Or does she fall in love with power and she just wants to control through Tiberius at that point?
All good questions. This is why, even though it'd be the death of this show, or our show, Movies We Dig, that we should stop recreating historical figures and we should just write pure fantasy. Because if this were speculative or fantasy fiction, it could be whatever, right? We are confined somewhat by the box we have put ourselves in. There are certain unavoidable things that we, I keep whacking the microphone. I'm sorry.
I mean,
Mike gets angry at you, Colin.
Gesture forcefully.
Unless we go full fanfic, Colin, like, are we just going to descend into magic?
Just alternative history.
Yeah.
Olivia is the Illuminati and she's still alive and she's still running everything.
There's a great bit in the Simpsons with Lucy Lawless as Xena, where she's like, anytime there's an inconsistency in the show or something doesn't make sense, a wizard did it.
Yeah. Great. Love it. Perfect.
Any other characters we're coming up on an hour and a half. So
maybe just the relationship between Julia and what's his name?
Euless? Okay.
Which I had to look up because he never showed up in Claudius. I'm like, who's this kid? And I'm like, Fulvia's son. Okay, got it. All right.
Mainly Julia gets such a bad rap historically, but in other versions, like Claudius.
Has anyone else slept with my daughter?
I don't not slept with my daughter.
It's because he's boss nass.
Yes. Which, again, I cannot believe that I didn't know Colin, and I feel like it's like changed my world.
It wasn't when Augustus goes like...
I can't take you seriously. No, I can't do it. No. But I really like Julia as just like this child who's surrounded by all of these family pressures, who's acting out in like the only way that she feels like she can. And I like I like Julia a lot, and I can't wait to see more from Julia in season 2.
Well, and she's technically following her mother's advice, right? Like her mother says, is like, dude, just do the marriage, pop out some kids, be discreet, and you can do whatever the F you want.
Yeah. I think it's also telling that there's like the generational difference between those kids versus Livia and Augustus and Agrippa and those people were like the people that were the children of civil war and grew up in civil war versus the children who are born only ever knowing wealth and prosperity and peace, right? They have that, right? And they act like that, right? There's a mini show in here of just like Gossip Girl or something. That's just like these kids bopping around Baiae and like they've got money, they're young, they're hot, and they've got money.
Except Euless
let's see where this
tells
takes
us that he listened to his brother get killed, like begging for mercy. So like he's
not Euless. Euless can't come.
I just like that they kind of end season 1 with Julie and Euless. Livia tries to be like, this ends now. And they're like, but we picked your side. So now you can't tell us what to do. And it's like, and that's going to backfire at some point. We know that's going to be.
Yeah. Again, like this, we know things don't work out for Julia or Euless for that matter.
No.
I don't know what the hell happens to that guy. Probably nothing good.
Right.
No, like all ancient historical figures, he dies somehow.
Well, I feel like there's a reason he's not an I, Claudius, right?
Yeah, that was like, wait, I don't know who this kid is. Why wasn't he an I, Claudius?
Because he dies.
Which one is he? All of them die. That's the point.
True. Okay, should we have our wrap-up thoughts and or maybe predictions for season 2?
Final thoughts. All right, my question is basically any final thoughts, final verdicts on the show, and then my final question to put to all three of you is, if you had to dispose of a body of Marcellus, let's say for the thought experiment, it's Marcellus's lover / poisoner. How would you do it? And also, for the sake of the question, you are also in. It's the 1st century BC.
Sure.
Which might make things a lot easier.
100%, way easier.
Well, considering they go into the sewer to find the turtle, and I'm like, is there no safe place to hide a body in the show?
But Christina, we can start with you. If you have any final verdicts, right? Recommend the show. Anything you want to add on that?
Yeah, I mean, well, to answer the one question about how to dispose of body, I mean, I would just take my, luxury boat out into the Mediterranean. Or if I'm in Egypt, I would just feed them to the alligators or hippopotami. That's one, I'm giving back to the environment because we're all about sustainability and, all that. But I mean, as far as closing thoughts go, I mean, I thought this was a really good show. I mean, I enjoyed it. I'm not going to lie. The first time I watched the first episode or two with my advisor when it first came out, and I thought it was kind of cringe, mostly because I'm watching Augustus getting head, and I was this is really uncomfortable to watch with my professor.
Definitely.
But after watching it again recently, I was like, okay, I'm entertained. I mean, I like the drama of it, and definitely it made me want to watch season 2 all the more. So I ended up just binge watching the second season right after that.
Nice.
So I enjoyed it. I thought it was fun. Historical inaccuracies and weirdness aside, it was fun. I'd recommend.
I mean, I love it, again, kind of for the reason I said, is I think it does an excellent job of illustrating actual power dynamics at the time period, which I feel like other shows are less successful at. So I see it as a true successor to Rome and I, Claudius. It feels like if you enjoyed those shows, you will love this as kind of a continuation, rehash of some of those characters that you might have fallen in love with in those two shows. And you know what? I'm just going to do what Agrippa does because that seemed highly effective. Hire a guy to smash in the person's face, saw some limbs off, and then nobody's going to find that body. So Agrippa gave us the winning
100%
technique already.
I mean, there is something to be said about how Agrippa is it's easy for him to murder somebody.
Oh, yeah.
And get away with it.
Yep.
He has a lot more resources at his disposal for that.
That's true.
That is
1,
true.
be rich. 2.
Yeah, be a man.
Yeah, because apparently being rich did not work for Livia.
Yeah, I really enjoyed Domina, and on a rewatch, I think I liked it just as much, especially having just watched a lot of Rome and all of I, Claudius. I feel like it is fun to see different takes on these same characters, a different rendition and a different reception of the same historical storyline. And I appreciate that it's very, very focused on the women in these stories, and especially on their power dynamics within among themselves. Even I feel like, they don't even have to talk about men. Sometimes it's even just about themselves and their children. For all of its failings, I agree, I do think it was really entertaining. And I'm really excited to watch season 2. So I would recommend. And definitely, if you're gonna bury a body on the beach, like, don't do it close to the water. Take jewelry and like things out of pockets, obviously. And I agree with Christy. If you can, chop it into smaller pieces and spread it down the beach.
Oh, yeah.
Much better. Even better if you can drop some of it in the water, because that will disintegrate more of it much faster. And if you have any, like, identifying features, get rid of them.
Which this leads me to a general question for archaeologists, in particular Eli. So when that body is discovered, not to like keep delaying the show, but it's been a year and that body is pretty much a skeleton.
Yeah, Nick asked me the same question when we watched this together. Depends on if the water had covered that area or not. Sand can be pretty drying. And if it was really hot, like a lot of things that are buried or encased in sand have an anaerobic, like, they don't have a lot of oxygen. And so like things, that are in Egypt are very, very dry. So they get very, very, mummified. That's why it's in Egypt, right? So it's more likely that if it was very, very dry on the beach covered in sand, that he would have had still like skin and hair, because it would have just been dry preserved. If it was wet and like the ocean had covered parts of him, I assume that parts of him would have been eaten, because there would have been like crabs and like things. So in a year and things eating him, there probably would have still been hair and bits of skin, but not mummified. So it would have been squishy, but there would definitely have been skeletal elements. So not necessarily like the super dry, like, let's pick this like skull out of the ground.
Good thing the Romans didn't have like DNA testing.
Right?
Yeah. Ironically, if the body had been closer to the surface, like earlier on, it would have deteriorated much faster.
100%. Yeah. Because everything would have eaten it. Like the seagulls, crabs, like little like things that live in the sand.
Raise yourself some scavenger birds.
Yes. 100%.
Vultures, they will pick those bones clean so fast.
Drawn attention, maybe, if you have like a bunch of birds, coming down into something.
Or you could just throw the body in a pile of fire and, just let it become dust.
Definitely. Yes. Excellent. Definitely. Yes.
Barbecue.
For
someone.
For seagulls. Exactly. Yeah. Great.
Yeah. I was thinking my strategy would be a boat, some rocks, and some chains.
Perfect.
Yeah. See, but that will also preserve the body, and it will float eventually. Because of, what was the line from Rome? The plutonic
ethers.
AKA corpse gas.
Corpse gas.
Your turn, Colin.
I didn't want to end on me, because I was going to end with it. Like, for me, I'm not totally sold on this show. And I find if it were fun and had jokes and was less fixated on making Livia a Republican, I think I would be on board with it. But those things kind of make the show a little bit of a for me.
Fair enough. Are you hoping for better for season 2 at least?
I really honestly, I just kind of hope that they just embrace Wicked, right? And just kind of like let Livia be bad, and like that's okay. But there's a need to kind of, in like these revisionist narratives with heroes, to like make them good, and then that creates a need to like make everybody else around them worse. Yeah. And then make them good retroactively.
I mean, Augustus and Agrippa are out here being like, not just murder him, like just get him out of the picture. So like, you're right. Livia needs to embrace that energy.
Yeah. I think that like we get why Livia does what she does without the necessary because it is about survival for so much of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And staying on top. And then even just like the motivation of like Marcellus will kill her children, which is, I think, plenty of motivation to murder Marcellus.
100%.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There doesn't also have to be this added weight of like, oh, and also I'm going to restore the Republic. Again, because I'm just sitting there back on my head, I'm like, you're going to do the opposite of that. You're going to further entrench us in empire. But, you know, anyways. Christy, do you want to do the sign off? I don't have anything typed up for it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So before we sign off, Christina, is there anything you would like to plug, or is there some places that people can follow you and learn more?
Yeah. So I'm on many social media. You can find me on Blue Sky as Dr. Christina Hotalen. You can also find me on Twitter as Doc Christina H. And then I also have an Etsy store for chainmail, In Chain in the Membrane, if anyone's into that sort of stuff. I got to thank Jeremy Swiss for that one. And I also have my my dissertation website embodying the empire on WordPress. You can see all the fun research that I did as a doctoral candidate. My pretty visualizations are all on there. And
we will put the link in the show notes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's all I really have. I mean, I'm just working on 2 conference papers right now on classical reception in heavy metal. I'm writing a paper on Agrippina the Younger, and I'm co-writing another one with Alexandra Sills on Spartacus. So fun stuff coming ahead. Well, maybe one day I'll get that stuff published. Who knows?
Excellent.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Christina, for joining us. And listeners, you can find us on most major streaming platforms as well as movieswedig.com. Please like and review and subscribe while you're there. You can follow us on Instagram and Threads at Movies We Dig, and on Blue Sky at movieswedig.bsky.social. Thank you again for listening. We'll be back to dig again when we excavate season 2 of Domina.
Woo! Bye.
Bye, y'all.
Bye-bye.